supposed leaders met remotely to decide that people should go and vote. So the humor in that is endless, or the evil in that, almost you could say, is endless. So how are you today? I know that was a sad
Um,
intro.
thanks for having me. So I am exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. Um, like what you spoke about with the quarantine, voting, everything along. So um, I am the coordinator for the Hmong Family Strengthening Program with CAP Services. We work with domestic violence and sexual assault focused on the Hmong community. We are based out of Portage County. However, our clients come from all over the place. Um, so we have stopped a lot of direct service with our clients. So we've been trying to move to virtual contacts, phone contact. In the event that there is an absolute need for face-to-face contact, then we will. However, we are maintaining the space recommended with 6 feet apart and whatnot. As of right now, all offices are closed to the public for CAP services. So we're most of us are working from home and doing what we can from there. Our shelter remains open as we do need to maintain that space with it. And like what you stated with voting, irony, they met via virtual to have folks go out and vote in person today. And Thai Moore District 9, County Rep District 9 has put, she had masks and pens, and they are in a bin outside her driveway, 2949 Minnesota Avenue. So anyone can stop by and grab it, make sure everyone is safe. I believe they're individually packaged, so folks can go there and pick it up on their way out. There's just some precautions that have been out there with when to go, wearing face masks and taking your own pen with you so that you can utilize that versus using what is available. Shout out to our poll workers who are risking their health to be at the polls and maintaining that for our voters.
Definitely shout out to them. That's crazy, and I'll make sure I put a note of that in the social media post for the masks. But it's crazy times right now. Crazy times for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And just quick intro for everyone listening. Other than Ann being just a total badass, the big reason I wanted her on the podcast is talking about this idea of wellness, or creating a system that covers wellness across cultures. Because I was just at a recent workshop in Mozambique, and everyone in attendance was white from a higher socio status, and they're talking about all of these systems for health and wellness and blah 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 blah, and how it makes people feel better, or what matters. And it's like, well, no, I mean, yes, in a very small little world, right? But what does wellness, what does mental health look like across cultures for everyone? I want to talk about that with you today, so we can kind of share that with people. And then just just a heads up for everyone listening or watching: eat something, because Ann and I always talk about food, and it will make you hungry. So I made sure I had a huge breakfast before we started this. So with that, let's dive into a little bit about your background, where you're from, where your parents are from, where you grew up, that kind of thing.
Okay. My parents came here as refugees from Thailand, I believe in 1980, yeah, 1980s. My oldest brother here, so he was the only one out of us to be born overseas in the refugee camp. I believe we settled in Minnesota. My parents settled,
What I'm gonna
where
interrupt
they
you real quick. Why were they escaping the refugee camp?
so due to the Hmong role in it, it was considered a secret war. So Hmong folks don't really acknowledge as they're part of it. You'll see lots of photos circulating now on Facebook and other social media. There's one that really stands out to me is that, with the Americans going over there, that they really didn't look at the ages of the Hmong boys that they were recruiting, that was being recruited into the into the war. to become soldiers. They were as young as 10, 11, 12. And there are photos of a grown man with, and then there are two young Hmong boys, couldn't be any more than 12 years old. And rifles are probably as they're only the same height as the rifles that they were using, or just a tad bit taller. In the Vietnam War, we were then persecuted by the Lao government. And so, in order to pursue safety, we fled into Thailand to refugee camps. And May 14th of 1975, that was a fall of Long Tieng. So that was a private military airbase Vang Pao had set up. And so with the fall of that, he was evacuated. And that's when Hmong folks started to be evacuated out of refugee camps. Of course, if you were involved in the war and you had higher ranks, you had priority to be lifted out of the refugee camps from there. So my parents got out. They got married young. They started a family young, but they were one of the folks that were able to escape the earliest. The last wave of Thailand came in about 2001 or so. Oh, no, 2000. I graduated in 03. So about 2001, 2002, with the last wave of refugees from Thailand.
Wow,
and
that's
so
a long
it's been
time.
close since.
It's a long
Yeah,
time to
so
be in a
it's been
camp.
close. Yeah, well, yeah, and so what happened was, there was a huge wave, and then it closed down, and then with the help of Ying, she had she was overseas and she was working in Laos, and she had really pushed that. And so for the last wave, a shout out to her. She did amazing. Most of the folks out. Now some of the Hmong folks are still overseas. Some are by choice. Some are because they weren't able to get the paperwork and get what they needed to make it safely here to the States. So with that being said, I believe my parents came to, and then they actually moved to Portland, Oregon for a little bit, and that's where I was born. And then we moved to Wausau when I was there for a little bit, and then I've been in Point ever since. So I wasn't born here, but I was definitely raised in the Stevens Point community. I went through the here. I received my associate's degree from Mid-State Technical College. So my life is all in Stevens Point. I can't picture myself living elsewhere. I say Stevens Point can be boring and there's not much to do, but there is to do here. It's completely, I think you just have to make most of it. Um, I know it's hard when folks come here, especially with my family from the Twin Cities. They're like, "There's nothing to do there," and I was like, "Yeah, but we have woods, we have lots of fishing spots close by. My partner does a lot of hunting, so to travel like 2 or 3 hours to get a spot, 15, 20 minutes one way, east, west, wherever he needs to go for hunting. So we have that here. I think the one thing I love about Stevens Point is that our community, our home community is so small that when things do come up, we're able to organize and really set forth into what we have in mind. And, there's not a lot of Hmong folks here. I want to say about 1,200 or so, but they really do make a difference. They're a lot more educated now thanks to funds that we have received through the Freedom Inc. Power Coalition. That there are a lot more civic engagement work being done within the community in Portage County. And so, just getting them to go out there and what the process is to be registered, to go out and vote, absentee ballots, what does it mean and what does it look like? And we always hear, I'm only one person, my vote doesn't matter. It's like your vote counts. That one or two don't go out and vote, that could very well mean, a difference in voting. I know what they're during my campaign, there are a lot of folks that came really, really close. And it was like if you look in percentage, probably like 49 to 50, really, really close. And I know there was a great turnout last year.
Oh, maybe not. So you touched on a lot there, and I kind of want to go back to you growing up. So you were born in Portland to the Hmong, to your parents. What did growing up in Stevens Point with a very white demographic. And you and I have talked about this previously. You know, there's kind of just the way you are, the person you are. You're outgoing. You didn't have a ton of. I still want you to share that and talk about it, and then how that kind of steered you into the path you're on now with your career choice.
Sure. So growing up, I had ESL. Growing up, everyone would always ask how to learn English, right? And I was like, oh, I learned from my older siblings. And they're like, why didn't you learn from your parents? And I was just kind of taken back. And growing up, you had these feelings, and you have these, you don't know what term to use for these thoughts and feelings. So I was just like, what do you mean? Like, didn't you all learn English from, your siblings? Like I had to, because my parents. I really never thought about that. And then growing up, I transitioned out of ESL. I want to say probably like in the second grade. I was the I was the youngest of my mom's kids, and then I have seven half siblings. So I was the youngest from my mom's kids. So I had a lot of home at that time. So I did transition out, I want to say probably the second grade or so. And then they tried putting me in ESL again when I got to the third or fourth grade. But then got a I don't want to say got kicked out, but I was transitioned out again. And then in middle school and at PJ's, I actually had written we had to do a project about writing a letter to one of the teachers. So I had written a letter to um, the ESL teacher at the time, Mrs. Loren, or Charlene Lorenz, I believe her name was. And so she's like, I can't put you in any of my ESL courses. However, I do have like a study hall for kids who don't speak, who has ESL or English as their second language. So that's kind of where I got into getting back with Hmong folks. Because growing up, I went to Madison until well halfway through my second grade, and then we moved. Then I went to Washington for my second grade. And then I went over to Jefferson. So Washington and Jefferson didn't have a large concentration of Hmong students. So wherever students were there, I made friends with them. But majority of my friends were white students. And then getting into to the middle high, I really didn't have any Hmong friends, because everyone, a lot of them were either in ESL or, they had different classes. But I seemed to be the one who was isolated from everybody. A lot of my friends that I eventually became friends with throughout the years there, they would always have classes with each other. And I had no idea. Like, it's just awkward for me. I'm not one to be able to just go and make friends. I'm really to myself until I get to know somebody. I can't just be like, you are my best friend and you are going to be my best friend whether or not you like it. So I had a lot of difficulties throughout middle school. For student council in in junior high, I was on student council, but even being in student council was kind of awkward because I wanted to make a change, but then it almost felt like a popularity contest because I was like, there's nobody, but somehow I won the vote. And then again, I think it's because mostly that their leadership skills within our people. Then I get to high school, and I have lots of Hmong friends at this point. But then I get there and I'm like, I have no classes with any of my Hmong friends. And then by the time high school hits, the white friends that I know, like, we're no longer friends because throughout the years, we would no longer have classes together, or everybody grows up, everyone gets into extracurricular activity, your friends change. And so throughout high school, it was a lot easier for me because I was able to, we had same classes, just same time frame. And so just being able to be older and having, different ways to communicate was simpler, and being able to meet up and do extracurricular activities, meeting up for dinner, meeting up for lunch, or different things like that. So growing up, and I didn't realize there was so much like racism because what I had said earlier is that I felt like I was more in a protected class. I was in a class, I think it was a business, and some of the students would joke around, and there would be teasing, and they'd be like, "Why are you doing that to them?" And it would stop. But then outside of that classroom, they would pick it up. Whenever there was anything that happened in school, it never happened when I was around. So I wouldn't, if I was out of the class that day, I'd come back to be like, oh my God, this went down. I was like, nothing ever happens when I'm around, but I think it might be because I'm one to be like, what the hell is going on? For my senior year speech class, we were supposed to pick a topic. Um, and I forget what type of speech it was, but we were just pick a topic. It was supposed to be okayed by the speech teacher. And someone had written up speech regarding if you don't speak English, go back to your country. And as she sang her speech, the whole room was just completely quiet. And I'm fuming at this point, and I'm pretty for my feelings at that point in time. So I ran downstairs to um, one of the guidance counselors, and I said, this is bullshit. Like, how do you allow this to happen in the high school and stuff? And so I really, but I know that the counselor had spoken to the teacher about it, and she's like, well, it's up to her if she wants to come back to class or not. And I'm like, that doesn't create any safer environment. And at the end of the year, we were supposed to write a little snippet about each other and what we learned. And so I got a lot of good feedback, but it didn't make me feel any better because out of all classroom, no one walked out with me. I'm the only one who stood up and walked out. And of course, majority were white students, but there were a couple of there too. And I'm like, it's so disappointing that folks say that they understand where you're coming from and they believe you and they trust you and they have your back, but they don't show that action. But I never thought of that as being into advocacy. I actually got into it opened the position, the advocacy role opened up for the Hmong Family Washington program.
I wanna interrupt you again. I'm sorry because you tell your story so fluidly, and you just kind of like you just on to the next thing, which is awesome. And I love your your leadership skills. But you mentioned how you were young at this time, able to discuss your emotions. With this kind of like you're now being confronted with racism, like just these evil dark side of culture. Were you able to talk about your emotions with your parents, with your Hmong friends? Like, were you about it in English, in Hmong, and then can you remember back to any of those conversations or what that was like?
Yeah, so I was already married to my partner, so I was no longer living at home with my parents. So, I did go home and I probably threw a fit. I had a happy day and this happened, but I did talk to my friends and a lot of it was like, oh my God, that's like bullshit. Like I can't believe it happened. Do about it. And I think at that time I didn't have I wasn't a strong organizer and I'm not a strong organizer now, but it's like, okay, let's do to really show, that hurts us as students of color. And the guidance counselor was like, yeah, what you want to do, come talk to me about it. And so we're like, yeah, like we were thinking about this. And then she's like, okay, like, let me know how it goes and how I can assist you at that point in time. And so I talked about, like maybe doing a play and showing like what our involvement was in the war and why we're here. But like I said, my organizing skills were not that strong. And so it was lots of talk, lots of talk. And I never once had any of my home peers or, other friends say, I think you're overreacting. It was a lot of support. Like that's like pure BS. Like that should have never happened. That teacher needs to be spoken to. And that should never happen. I finished that class and I never really just followed up on it. Last I heard, kind of still the same thing going on, just less per se. But yeah. So I was able to speak to my peers and my friends about and but then like I said earlier, it's really hard to put that term into your emotions. Even when I first started where I'm now, so hard to understand these terms because I didn't know what these terms until we started talking about them. It's like, oh my God, that's how I've always felt. That's me. And now I have a time to be able to put with my feelings so that other folks can understand what I mean. Um, but growing up, I think we faced a lot of the same things within the school system. So it was easy for us to talk about it among our peers. It was difficult for all of us to, or I shouldn't say all of us, but it was difficult for me to go talk to, my parents or even my partner about depression or things like that because it's so difficult to really translate depression into Hmong words because depression means so much more than just feeling down like that or because you don't just want to say I don't feel like I want to live anymore I but there's so much more meaning behind depression, and like mental health and things like that. And you have to really look at the terms that you're using in the correct context, because if you're not, then it can completely the wrong way.
Yeah, there's a couple different things I want to go there. I remember you telling me about, I think it was your mom, if she were to like come check up on you, it would be in a very physical of the context versus actually asking you about how you were feeling or how your mental space was. I think that was you were telling me,
I don't know.
or
Well,
maybe.
I know, like, well, so the thing is, growing up, we didn't have communication the way white folks would be like, "Oh my God, I love you. I'm so proud of
Yeah,
you. You know, you're
that's
doing
what it
such a great
was.
job." So, as my children are growing up, it was brought up to like my daughter was like, "You never say you love me," and blah blah. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like, we never grew up saying that stuff. Like, we were never emotional growing up because like felt like we were weak if we showed emotion, crying, tears like that. And so we never did that. However, one thing that my parents would always show that if their love for us, they're saying that are you hungry? Did you eat yet? Make sure you eat some more. And so that's always kind of been like a running thing with my daughter and I now. It's like, are you hungry? And it's like so within one another, or you kind of get into a little quarrel. It's like, are you hungry? Do you want to eat? Like, do you want to go eat with me? Or like, what do you want to eat? Let's order something to eat. So just like being able to, and I think I told you in an earlier conversation, like a lot of Hmong folks speak in riddles. And so they're point blank. And so it's like, okay, what do they mean this time? What does that mean? Are they really saying that to really say that? Or is that just something else that they mean? And so growing up, I was always the child who was like, no, I don't know what you mean. Where I think my older siblings like, this is dumb. Like, I'm not even where I would get nosy and I'm like, "Mom, like, what do you mean?" And then I got to the point where mom was like, "If you don't know, don't ask." And I was like, "Okay." So I got my dad. So why don't you go ask? So she would just kind of laugh and giggle, and she would go and find out. And so that's how I started learning a lot more things. And then once I had my own family, then my relationship with my dad was a little bit more different. Is was grew a lot more, I should say. So I would be like, "So, what do you mean when you say this?" Or like, "Oh, why do we do this? Like, what's the meaning behind all of this?" And it's like because my parents always tell me to do things, but it's like, but if you don't give us a context behind it, reasoning behind it, we're doing it, but then it's meaningless unless we know why we're doing certain things, the way it's supposed to be done. And, I think with me being so nosy and it's like, I'm just gonna keep asking you. So instead of you putting me off, just tell me and we're done with it. Like I'll stop bothering myself. And so I would do that to some of my uncles. So I would kind of pick and choose who I could have that type of relationship with, where I could be like, and I'm a jokester. So a lot of my aunts and my uncles know that I'm a jokester. And so when I'm asking them something, I have that relationship built with them. And so they were a little bit more willing to tell me things. So now my siblings do that to me now. My sisters and my brothers will be like, hey, you have a better relationship with them, or you can talk to old people and we really can't have people. You go find out. So now I'm kind of like in that role where it's like we want to know, but we don't know, and you probably don't know, so you go find out for us.
I love it. Before we dive into the cultural aspect of food that you kind of you teased, and I definitely want. So you had this early experience in life, where you had this super negative experience that shouldn't, and your peers and people in leadership were like, oh yeah, that shouldn't have happened, but when you called for action, it didn't happen, right? Like there was like this on your support network and in people in power that should have been stepping up for you as a student. So you had that experience, like this natural curiosity for your culture, that history, where your parents are coming from, what they're talking about, and curiosity also kind of bleeds into your leadership qualities, like you were talking about initially, how you something that shouldn't have happened, you'd be like, what the hell, why is this happening? Where does all of that fit into, like you were talking about, advocacy and your role now with what you're doing with the Hmong culture? Because it feels to me like you have both an innate and it's practiced from many years of figuring out the system and people and how to. But was there a moment when you felt like, this is my role, I need to step up and do this? Or
Yeah. So going back to the incident in my senior year, I had the support from my peers and my friends. I had the word of mouth from the from the guidance counselor saying that she would support. We had a lack of an organizer, a strong organizer, and so I think that's where it fell through. I feel like if we had a strong organizer, the way we do many strong organizers today, I think it would have been so much different. And with our youth now, I think with what we have is we have a lot of leaders in place at this time versus what we did 20 years ago. And so I think that was really the big difference is like, where do I go for support? Because, we didn't have this program at CAP Services where I was working from home and then this position opened up. Well, not the coordinator, but an advocacy program opened up for the Hmong Family Strengthening Program within Family Crisis Center CAP Services. And I was like, oh, like I'll apply. I get it if I don't, I don't, because I already have a job, and everything. But this would be a change completely different than what I'm ever used to. I have in banking and I have my associate's degree in business supervisory management, so completely different than what I'm doing now. And so so before this position opened up, I was like, well, I might as well get my CNA because nursing was kind of like in the back of my mind, like, oh, maybe I'll check out the CNA program, see how I like that, and I'll do RN. So I really liked my CNA program, and so I then enrolled in the RN program. I like maybe 2 semester away or so, and before I started my RN program. And then this position opened up, then I applied for it, and I was like, oh, cool, okay, that's great, but I have no idea what advocacy is. Just like the terms outreach or direct services, very simple terms. I'm like, I don't know what any of that means, and just different terms. I had no idea what they meant whatsoever, and so I learned my advocates role started growing. So my first week on the job, I did what somebody would have done within the first year. So I learned all of that in one by choice, but because of current events. And so then it was time for me to start my RN program. Comes my year, a year within to this position. And so I get this letter. I'm just kind of ignoring it. Like, I think I want to stay with advocacy. And call from the RN program, and they're like, "Hey, you never responded. Like, we want to make sure that we get an answer from you before we take you off of the waiting list." Oh, and like, are you sure? Because you do realize that if you get off the waiting list, you have to start all over at the end of the waiting list. I was like, honestly, my ultimate goal for an RN was to become a SANE examiner. So that's a sexual assault nurse examiner. And that was my ultimate goal. And I love the same nurses that we worked with here. However, I was like, I see the work that they do and I love it, what they do, but I need that interaction. I really want I I want to be able to support victims in the way that they need support. And I felt like my role with them would have been much stronger than being a SANE examiner for them. Um, and so I was kind of like, yeah, no, I'm gonna turn down the RN program. They were super, super shocked. And so when I tell folks this, like my ultimate goal was to become a SANE examiner. However, because my work within the advocacy, that completely changed. Like I see how important certain SANE examiners are. However, I see myself as a better fit within the advocacy role. And so I was here for about a year and a half or so, and then the coordinator position opened up. There's a term to it. There's terms to use that people will understand versus trying to explain your feelings because feelings may not be the same. Um, and so it was suggestions was that one of the trainings that we have where we have like workshops or breakout sessions is where we really just bring it back to the for new advocates, like how are you feeling, do you know if there are terms, what are feelings that you have that you feel like no one else has. And I understood that there were terms to this. It was so difficult to do this job. You will burn out, definitely. There's a lot of burnout here. And so self-care is a huge thing. If I get a call from a staff, hey, I'm just not feeling well, there's just so much. It's like, what, if you need to take half day off to take care of yourself, we need you to take care before you handle anything else. There are folks that can step in for you. We with the office that I work out of, I work with a lot of other coordinators here. We can kind of tell when someone's not feeling the best. And so we'll just kind of nod and say, hey, how are you doing? Did you need any support? Did you want to tell? And it's just like that quick check-in with each other, just acknowledging like, hey, I know a lot of things are heavy. If you want to talk about it, that I'm here for you. And then just a network of other folks in this advocacy world is amazing, because then you can talk about your feelings, and they understand how you're feeling, and it's like, okay, and they're giving you the space that you're needed. So it's not like they won't say, how can I help, how can I support you.
Mm-hmm.
And I like using the term support versus help. And so just being able to use that is just super awesome.
I want to dive into that from a couple. Gotta wait for the feedback. So you're talking about, it you 30 years to like figure out, decode your emotions into terms so you can then communicate. From your position, what are I'm going to ask this in like a 3-part question, but as someone who's, you're advocating for language, then how do we integrate that into kind of this the new system, people's rights and kind of racism and culture in America?
For Hmong folks, it is the 45th year since the Falun Gong, what we talked about earlier. And so I had introduced a Hmong education bill within the students. And I am hoping that that'll be brought up within our next school board meeting. And so what it is being proposed, and it's being proposed in different cities throughout Wisconsin. So I believe Weston, Holman, La Crosse, and Eau Claire have passed a resolution in support. And so, we talk about having diversity, inclusivity, and things like that. And it's like, but nowhere in our text, nowhere in our curriculum is it required to teach about the Hmong history. And Hmong folks make up the Hmong language is the most common language other than English and Spanish spoken in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin home to the third largest population of Hmong folks. And so, just having this is like, okay, so we have these numbers, this is accurate. But why aren't we teaching this? And some teachers are putting in Hmong history within their curriculum, but it's not a requirement. They are just doing that, with their work. So so it is a request that we put it in curriculum in the at least in the Stevens Point School District's education curriculum. We would like to see a bill passed in the state of Wisconsin. From what my understanding is, it was not brought up at WASB, and so it's been shut down for Wisconsin. However, I think each individual school districts can implement it into the curriculum. And when I had discussed this with other folks, we're not saying teachers to go out and just Google information, but what we would like to do is we would like to have, folks who really know this stuff and get together stuff on a certain website, or, a certain resource guide or something along those lines, so that teachers and educators can actually take it from that information and you put it into the curriculum. We're asking, maybe like even a week of our history within school, because I think, it kind of goes into like our youth. The question you asked about youth is, I think the hardest thing to talk about is, because I struggled with this growing up too, is, when I'm at home community, it was so difficult. Just learning all these things. We're at home, we're taught something completely different than we are in the school system. You know, my friend, I was at her house one day and I had seen, she's white, and so I had seen a picture of her at a wedding, and I'm like, wait, whose wedding were you at? And she's like, my parents. I'm like, what do you mean you were at your parents' wedding? And so, and what I see in the youth nowadays is that even though they may be my age or just a bit older, I think the Hmong roots are still really strong and ingrained, and I think the expectation of the traditional roles are still there in certain families. So hearing stories from youth, who identify. I think it's tougher for them growing up because they still have that expectation to 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 maintain their expected roles as a Hmong daughter, to help take care of the home, the family, cooking, cleaning, things like that, where they feel like maybe their brothers have it more easy, where they may be home but they're not cooking, they're not taking care of the younger ones, or they're going to work and coming back, and that's so I think that's where there's that barrier, and and how do we go from there? And I know that we have conversations all the time with our youth, like it is upsetting. It is upsetting when you think it is unfair, and it is unfair. However, like how can you relate? How do you have healthy conversations, with your parents to express your feelings? Because we know that expressing your feelings is not a strong suit for us. It's difficult to talk about our feelings. Um, and so, how do we have these conversations? And how do we understand? Well, we do offer support. If you would like, we can certainly be there to be there to hear the conversation, to support both of you in the conversation, so that it doesn't lead, into something negative, but to have a more calm conversation. I talked to my sister-in-laws and them, and they're like, well, versus you don't know the culture, because then when we're saying you're cutting the onions wrong according to culture, that's incorrect. Where you can say you're cutting it wrong because that's not how I taught you to cut it, then that's more of a correct term. You can't. And I used to do this all the time, where I would ask my kids to rinse. I'd be like, can you rinse a couple of green onions? And then they'll do two. And I was like, I need like five. You didn't say five, you just said a couple. And so it's gotten to the point where I'm very blunt with my kids, like, hey, can you do like half of it? And so they can determine half. And then it's gotten to the point where, okay, they know what I'm cooking, they know how much of something that I need. And so being very just just telling them outright, like, hey, this is what I need to do, versus trying to speak. And I think is closing the gap in the youth and the older folks, because sometimes I'm like, Dad, I don't know what you're saying. Mom, I don't know what you mean. Like, can you just tell me what it is? Because I was like, gosh, I'm once my kids started growing up and I would ask them to do things, I'm so turning into my parents, because that's always been the term that I've heard from my parents. So it's like, hold up, I can't do that to my kids. Like, I really need to take a step back. Another hurdle, or obstacle, I think, with our youth is, being able to provide our youth with a space to what safety looks like in our community. And what does that mean? Because I think there's just so much stuff that we don't talk to our because we either don't have the knowledge about it, we don't have enough information about it, or we just think that it's taboo to talk about it. And help you with that specific issue. If you are a victim of some sort of violence and you need help with other things, certainly come in, deal with that. But I think because there's not a full understanding of what domestic violence or sexual assault really looks like in our community, in our language, it's really difficult. I know, like, my close family members do know what I'm doing, and do know what this job is. I know before I took this position and it was opened up, I did have a conversation with my partner, and he's like, I just don't want you to be leaving relationships. And it's like, that's not the purpose of this position, of that. It's like, here for support. It's like, we are here to provide options that they're looking for, and so that's all that we do. We don't say you need to do this, you need to do this. And it's like, okay, these are your options. And there's always the option of, or you don't have to do anything. That's all in there. So it's, we don't persuade anyone one way or another. And then, like, youth advocacy, I think the youth does a super job. Young adults, a very young adult, but I think with her family history of being advocates, and I always say she's been doing advocacy work for years and years, and not getting a paycheck. But now that she is able to do what she has always done, now she's able to earn a living, and she's still in college and stuff. So she's a busybody. But I think that having a young, due to the fact that there's not enough resources, and I think right now we already have 3 languages that are being taught in the school system. may not be one thing that we can add at this point in time. But we are looking at like the culture and the history of Hmong folks.
I love it. It's awesome. So I think that's a great kind of summary for everyone listening at home for kind of like what's going on at the cultural level or in the community level with integrating and welcoming the Hmong history and culture, right? Because that's the big core for all of this is, like you said earlier, it was always just glossed over in the textbook. School. I know I grew up with a few Hmong friends in my classes, and then my cousin, she's and that kind of, you were talking about cooking. I want to make sure we have time to cover the cultural part of food. So like you talked about earlier, your mom asking if you've eaten enough was kind of like that emotional check-in, and I love that because so much of like Western wellness talks about, oh, it's bad to emotionally eat, or there's so much guilt forced upon people from the media, from wellness and health culture about eating. There's some growing movements like the local food movement, and kind of like this the bigger awareness for, no, food does tell a story. Food conveys emotion. Food convey all of these things to us. For you personally, for Hmong culture, what part does food?
I think food plays so much into our lives. You know, like Hmong food has a lot of integration between like Lao, Thai, Cambodian food, right? And so I don't think Hmong food is per se a certain dish, but I think it's more of a feeling that you get when you consume foods. And going back to what I said earlier about when my mom would be like, "Are you hungry? Did you eat?" And I think that's more showing love. They understand the struggles of being hungry, running in the jungles, and not having enough food growing up. And so I think for them, that's how you would show love, providing a meal for the person that you loved. Um, and one funny thing is, one day, it was just recent. Want to say probably within the last year, grandpa's house, and he was like, "We made food. Do you want to eat?" And I was like, "No, it's okay." He's like, "Oh, you should eat." And so grandparents are always like, "Eat, eat, eat." And so I'm like, "Okay." And I was like, "No, I'm full." And then it was pho, I think, that they had made. And so he was like, "Eat." And I was like, "No, grandpa, like I'm full. I just ate." He's like, "No, eat." And I was like, "No, I'm not." And then he's like, "Well, make sure you don't eat too much because you're getting kind of big." And so, it's like, eat, but then but watch where you're eating. And so I'm like, okay, you can eat because I get where you're coming from, but please don't say that to like other people because weight really is an issue that we don't really talk about. And so I'm like, okay, and so we hear that. And well, I'm sorry, what was the question?
No, you're doing
So
a great job of answering
okay.
it. Where food, like you said, not Hmong dishes specifically, but like where food plays into Hmong culture, and then off of that, so, and you and I have talked, like, truly they would hunt, they would gather, they would farm. It was a very indigenous culture and society. And then when everyone transitioned and came here, was there like a stumbling period where uh, struggled to find access to food? Was there like confusion as to where food was, what was food? And then the big thing we're seeing,
Definitely.
real quick, the big thing we're seeing now with a lot of indigenous, um, well, tribes in North America or people that immigrate, they're at a lower socioeconomic status, which then means they're into like the fortified, high calorie, low nutrient foods. What disease look like in the Hmong culture or population here because of a limited access to foods they would eat?
Mhm. So, I think one struggle I heard from my mom when they first came here was woman has a baby, a brand new baby. She's supposed to be on a 30-day chicken diet. And so it consists of just chicken and would traditional eat versus, like um the like Cornish hens or just a chicken you get from random grocery stores. Completely different types of chicken. The chickens from the grocery stores that you can buy all this is this fatty, almost you you can almost taste like the hormones that are injected into it. Versus if you were able to raise your own chicken, you're feeding them corn, you're feeding them rice, you're feeding healthy stuff. You can the meat is much tougher, but not too tough because it's full of muscle. It's not fat, and so you can completely tell the difference. And so that was a struggle my mom had faced when she came in and she started having us. Go with that is we do cultural if you still practice shamanism, like we do, we would need to a pig from somewhere who is not feeding it hormones. For the kids, for the folks who grew up eating stuff from the grocery store, they're like, no, you can't tell the difference. But because there is so anal about it, we my siblings and I can tell the difference between, like what is, I don't want to say probably wasn't organic, but more free range versus something that was kept, in a barn its whole entire life, and then slaughtered. So we know that difference. And, like our earlier discussion, we talked about food, and it really is more of a feeling versus an actual dish. Um, because when we're eating, we always talk about our soul food. Like, what do we consider is Hmong soul food? And for me, one thing I would always talk about is I dubbed it meatless, just because that is a very direct translation because it's kongai zhou. Kongai is meat, zhou is lift or carry. So I meat lift for the sake of it. All it is like pulled pork. It is just like pulled pork without any kind of barbecue sauce or anything. You just it isn't it's a dish that came from leftover. And so traditionally, when you have big gatherings, you would boil pork with probably green. And so whenever there was like a big pot of it left over, parents would just slow cook it and just cook it until it was just like pulled pork. And then, it would be encased in the pork fat. And so it would be good for days and days and days. It wouldn't go bad because it's covered in pork fat. And so, eating that with rice is like always my thing. So, I always tell my kids, like, do you know the meaning behind this food? Like, do you know where it comes from? And they're like, yeah, you just make it because it's good. It's like, no, it's actually just leftovers, from like back in the days. It's kind of like goulash or, other things, other dishes that people make, right? You just have all this leftover and you don't want to waste it, so you make the most out of it. For me, because I know that there's an easy access for me to be able to provide fulfillment. I do intentionally make that dish. So usually when I have leftovers, we just throw it out because it's not enough to make a dish out of it. But Emma will still do it, so she'll wait until there are leftovers. So when we say leftovers, we're not talking about leftovers that people have been picking. We're talking about the leftovers that remain in the pot that has been untouched. And so she cooks and she makes sure she gives me a call. I always say I'm my grandma's favorite, but it's only because I always respond to her. So I get those, made meals from my mom and my grandma. And just the other day, my mom had gotten this huge, huge, and so I'm like, Mom, your pig is so fat. And like, you're making pork rinds, right? She's like, yep. And so we had chopped up all the meat, and so she had gotten a 5 gallon full of fat and skin, and so she made pork rinds. And she's like, I didn't get that much. I was like, I didn't think you would because we had only gotten a bucket. So I had fresh Hmong pork rinds sitting in my freezer now because of that. And and going off of that, we really don't waste anything from the animal that is being butchered. We use as much, so like the intestines. I recently butchered a pig, and I use intestines to make sausages. And so a lot of the inner keep, and we make them for various a variety of different dishes. So like the heart, the spleen, the tongue and ears, that will all be cleaned. It'll be fully cleaned, boiled until tender enough, and then cut. And then it is garnished in a bowl of vermicelli noodles along with a pork broth, lime and herbs. And it really is, it's some folks would be like, why would you eat that stuff? It's like, until you've had it, like, joke about it, because that is some of the most amazing things that you will have. I'm not a liver person. The texture just doesn't sit well with me, but other fish, venison, different things that was readily available. My dad was, so we grew up on a lot of that stuff. So some of my cousins, my uncles didn't go out and do that. So they're like, oh, that's so gross. And even like my older sister, she doesn't eat. some of them don't even listen. But I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Only because I grew up eating that, and it's like, it depends on how it's cooked. And I try to replicate my mom's cooking, doesn't work. I replicate my dad's cooking, doesn't it does not work. So being able to go to their house and just having a meal with them is amazing. I came back from California on the 20th, March 20th. Oh no, March 17th, and I had to be in isolation because I traveled, and so my mom had traveled to her house. It was the best and saddest couple of days of my life. It was best because I got up. I was sleeping on the couch. I would get up and get ready in the bathroom. Came up, no cleaning. It was just amazing to like be babied at my mom's house.
That sounds fantastic. I love it. Well, we're over an hour, and I want to wrap the Ann Vang. So your ideas on uh, community and advocacy during the situation we're in right now. So, what does community look like for you during this?
I think it's for the Hmong community. I think it's so difficult because funny story. I'm a storyteller. So before we were going to our trip to Sacramento, so okay, so back in March there was this whole thing, and so it happened to be my aunt's funeral down in Oklahoma, and so we get down there, and my grandma was like, my maternal grandma was like, come over and eat egg. Well, we had gotten a call from my sister not to boil eggs and eat. We're like, well, we're not home, and then we get to Oklahoma, and my grandma was like, I didn't find out about this until later. And they're like, yeah, grandma made us eat eggs. She boiled eggs and she had our names on it. And so whoever wasn't there didn't get to eat theirs, but then she made us eat yours. And we're like, okay. And so there's this whole thing on social media about you need to eat eggs, otherwise, you're going to be something spiritually will happen. Like, okay, like again, that's where the thing is, we're, more traditional, and we grew up here in the States. So there's a lot of we're so skeptical about things, right? And so on a trip before we went to Oklahoma, my mom passes me these red and white string things, right? And so this is to really traditional is to keep you safe and ward off evil spirits and whatnot. And so I started laughing, and my one of my son was like, "Hey, mom, is this for the coronavirus?" And I started laughing. I was like, "It's grandma," so I wouldn't doubt it. And so I was tying it all on my kids' hands, partners, and my mother-in-laws. And so when we were leaving, I picked up my mom. We were heading to our to the airport, and I said, "Hey, is this because you think of the coronavirus?" She goes, something that can be spread like a virus. And then just recently, my mother-in-law had made it looks almost like a dream catcher type thing, but it was made out of bamboo. And so she has that at each of our doors tied with red strings, red fabric, and that is to ward off evil spirits. Because it was heard on social media that something bad was supposed to happen on the 30th, and so we were supposed to die. So die just means that you don't go outside of your home and you stay, and no one's allowed in or out of your home. And so we did that for those days. And as a couple, we're like, okay, if that's your belief, we will certainly, do what you wish. And so it's still sitting there. But like with the community, when it first came out, and we knew it was a virus, we knew how easily it could be spread. And even though CDC didn't as much information as what we have today, it was like, constant washing your hands, keeping, safe, keeping clean, don't cough on other places, cover your cough, cover your sneezes, things like that. And I think like with older people, my opinion, folks, is that we try. Um, I personally have been telling my kids, grab a plate, and then, if you want seconds, use it, and don't use your own spoon. And so I think with older folks, from what I've seen with my mother-in-law, is that I think she feels bad that she thinks that we're so disgusted with one, because it's at this time it's not safe for any of us. And I'm like, and it's not because like we're disgusted of her. It's more like if any of us have it and she's older, her immune system is going to be weaker. As a community, being able to get all this PSA now in the home language is helping a lot. Having other folks come on, folks who work in the medical field, come on and really talk about the importance of keeping safe, like CDC guidelines, and like why we need to do this, or why is helping the community a lot more. I know my brother-in-law had wanted to do a spiritual feeling for his son before he was being, I don't know if he's being deployed or what's going on, but he wants to do something to keep him safe spiritually. And I said we can't do that because it's out there that no gatherings of more than 10 people, so that's not something that we can do. And so, and right now with Hmong funerals, they're so huge, and with the we can't gather more than 10 people in a place, a lot of funerals have been canceled because of it. And so it's so hard because Hmong funerals are traditional Hmong funerals are so big, and there's so much that is involved in it that um depending on where you live, sometimes you can't even home until like maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. And so now that our deceased loved ones are now really just sitting there and they're not getting that proper, because we can't just have a funeral with just 10 people there. There's just so much more that goes on with funerals. And so I know that one of my aunts, her funeral was supposed to be actually this coming weekend, but they had to postpone it. Actually two aunts. So both funerals are postponed. One is postponed until May, one at least, and until the end of April. And so, just seeing that the community is coming to understand that, hey, there really is a big issue where, the hell no more gatherings of 10 or more is prohibited. And just seeing that they're willing to put out things to keep everyone safe, continue with traditions is definitely, I feel like we've come a long ways to see that, to see them, because I know probably 10, 15 years ago, without having all this other information of Hmong and without having Hmong folks in different fields, I think it would be more can do it. It's okay. Um, and I think a lot of it, going back to the whole spiritual thing, some folks do still believe that it's spiritual and not a virus. I've talked to people about that. Oh, I think it's just people, spreading rumors, but I'm still too scared to go. And it's like, okay, I'm glad to hear that you're scared to go out. You shouldn't be scared to go out. You can still take your walks, just keep your distance, keep yourself safe. I'm like, no, I don't want to go out because I don't feel like I'm safe if I go out, because I'm scared I don't want to get this virus. And it's like, great. So, just having lots of different information going out to our community is helping. And, I
Older family members I've talked to who initially were like angry that we weren't visiting or people weren't visiting or they weren't allowed to go to these areas. Now they've done a complete 180 and they're like, oh yeah, we need to take this seriously. Like this is an actual threat. So it's across cultures. But and I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. Love the idea of having the Hmong tradition and the history integrated into schools and everything. Like it's long overdue. It needs to happen. And then you need to release the Hmong cookbook that I can buy and then create all the dishes that you post. So you coming on and started getting this conversation started. I know we just scratched the surface of everything, but the idea of global cultural wellness has to start from people actually talking about, like you've been talking about history, culture, growing up between years, and then someone like yourself who has the curiosity and the leadership to be able to integrate them and then help people everywhere. Really pretty cool. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah, and I wouldn't be where I am today without the folks that actually paved the way for me to be doing this work. So there are just so many more advocates out there that have been doing this for over 20, 30 years. And so big shout out to them.